Namaskar from Deshsanchar's Diplomatic Eye. I am Mitra Bandhu Poudel. Welcome to the new episode. This program is aimed to provide the analytical viewpoint on the topical issues in terms of diplomacy, foreign affairs and international relations. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 14th episode of Diplomatic Eye entitled Climate Diplomacy, Cope and Contradictions. What next? An agreement on how to combat climate change is reached by world leaders, ministers and negotiators at the United Nations Annual Climate Change Conference, also called the Conference of the Parties or COP, and governments that have ratified the Paris Agreement, the Kyoto Protocol and or the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change UNFCCC are among the talks parties. In addition, thousands of representatives from the media, international organizations, business sector and civil society attend the COPs as quoted by Towand and Averg 2023. First World Climate Conference held in Geneva February 12 to 23 and 1979 was sponsored by the World Meteorological Organization. It served as the site of one of the first notable global conferences on climate change. Researchers from several fields attend what amounted to be scientific symposium. After concluding that the UNFCCC's existing processes were insufficient, the first conference of the countries, COP1, approved the Berlin Mandate, which enables countries to make specific commitments. In relation to climate change, Nepal has enacted at least 19 national policies. There are over 30 global and over 14 regional negotiations completed so far. The main focus of COP meeting is on discussions and negotiations. The review's objective is to assess the UNFCCC's overall goal of limiting climate change. Some significant initiatives. The Kyoto Protocol 1997. As per the Kyoto Protocol, which was adopted at the third conference of the parties, COP3, industrialized nations were assigned legally binding targets for the first time to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. The 7 greenhouse gases applied to the Kyoto Protocol are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, sulfur hexafluoride and nitrogen trifluoride. Nitrogen trifluoride was added during the second compliance phase of the Doha round. The Copenhagen Accord 2009, it was adopted by the 15th Conference of Parties, COP15. It recognized the need of keeping global warming below 2 degrees Celsius, protecting vulnerable forests and establishing a framework for a green climate fund. Developed countries were urged to provide developing countries with $30 billion in fast start climate finance and by 2012, and they were also urged to increase the fund to $100 billion annually by 2020. These funds would be used by developing countries for mitigation and adaptation efforts. Next is the Paris Agreement 2015. The Paris Agreement, the first legally binding agreement, was adopted at COP21, uniting 196 nations for the first time behind a common cause. Nations were required to commit to lowering their emissions, preventing the global average temperature from rising by 2 degrees Celsius beyond pre-industrial levels and maintaining it below 1.5 degree Celsius. These were the goals of the nationally determined contributions. By the middle of the 20th century, it also aimed to attain global net zero emissions, often known as climate neutrality. Nepal's Prime Minister's focus on COP28. Prime Minister Pushpakamal Dahal Prachanda addressed the COP28 summit in Doha on December 2, 2023. According to Rising Nepal, PM Prachanda emphasized during his speech to the UN Climate Change Summit COP28 being held in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, that Nepalis are plagued by extreme weather events due to sheer injustice to us. And PM Prachanda also said that scientists predict the glaciers will lose one-third of their mass due to their rapid retreat, and that's a red flag as reported by the Rising Nepal. Despite making almost no contribution to global emissions, the Prime Minister worried that Nepal is suffering from the direct, disproportionate and harmful effect of climate change as reported by the Rising Nepal. As stated by the media, Prime Minister claimed that our people are terribly impacted by climate related calamities including landslide, floods, wildfires, glacier lake outburst, drought, etc., because of the terrible injustice that has been imposed upon us. The Prime Minister argued that this is a complete injustice. This needs to end right away. Now, let us talk about the discrepancies between the environmental conservation practices linked to the climate change issue in Nepal. Soil and watershed management expert Robin Bogati believes that environmental conservation practices in Nepal and elsewhere in the world are not really conservation responsive to climate change issues. Climate change, according to Mr. Bogati, has been a begging pot and showcase for Nepal. Mr. Bogati further said, there are dozens of people at COPs, tens of people with the Prime Minister, 5 to 7 with the Minister, and ridiculous media. However, there are 2 or 3 non-governmental organizations that are doing excellent work in the field of environmental conservation and are getting paid for it, saving the faces of the government and journalists. That none of these journalists are covering their excellent work astounds him greatly. Instead of claiming environmental payment, Nepal is not managing its forest. Not cutting them is not management. One of the conservation specialists who asked not to be identified stated that it is not appropriate to hold people accountable for climate change emissions while destroying forest and other pristine areas that are important to the ecosystem for the sake of the needless development. If necessary, one should develop a long-term plan and take the appropriate action within the allocated time frame. For example, license for a hydropower project is for 15,000 megawatt, but only about 3,000 megawatt have been produced up to this point. The current aim of 15,000 megawatt is reached in a particular amount of time if we have an assured market for more than 10,000 megawatt. We can then prepare for the next 10 years. Likewise, the maximum required for Nijgarh International Airport is 2,000 hectares, but claims are made for around 8,000 hectares, which is meant to damage the wild elephants living corridor over Rautarhat area. Dr. Bharat Pokhrel, an associate professor and director of graduate program at the Department of Agriculture and Environment Science, Tennessee State University, told these analysts that Nepal has been leading country in conservation of its flora and fauna. There are numerous success stories we have witnessed in the past few years. These successes come with dedication and hard-working individuals who work around the clock. However, a question arises, whether we are sustaining our conservation practices for the long run. For example, rhino poaching was zero few years back, but it has been devastating in the past few months. Why is this happening? Dr. Poudel believes that because we have been practicing ad hoc programs and activities without addressing the root cause of the program. Therefore, it is important to address the root cause of the problem rather than short term gain or popularity. Another example is we conserve flora and fauna, but forget to preserve or conserve their habitat such as soil, water and forest. Are there any soil and water conservation program? We only are focusing the output, not the outcomes. Rhino numbers, according to Dr. Poudel, are output, whereas conservation of entire ecosystem is the outcome. Are these conservation practices linked to address the major environmental issue of our time, the climate change? Dr. Poudel does not agree with this. He says we should be tackling this problem differently. For example, we should be addressing climate change in order to meet the conservation need, not vice versa. Most recently, climate smart practices such as climate smart forestry, climate smart agriculture have received attention because there is no doubt about climate change, but we need to adapt it and work on mitigation measures. Climate change, as per Dr. Poudel, will have major impacts on conservation. Therefore, why not climate smart conservation practices? Prakash Shrestha, the coordinator at Nepal Tiger Trust, argues that there are several reasons for the disparity in environmental conservation methods related to the climate change problem. Mr. Shrestha thinks that one of the primary causes is that both the general public and the government are ignorant of the problem. The majority of Nepal's leading politicians are reluctant to enact laws that would restrict the financial gains made by the supporters or preferred commercial establishments. This makes it challenging to inspire people and political parties to adopt conservation related behaviors, according to Mr. Shrestha. Development practitioner Devraj Gautam asserts that Nepal has committed to fulfill the Paris Agreement towards net zero emissions by 2045 by keeping 45% forest land as well as utilize hydropower to fulfill the clean energy demands in Nepal and its neighboring countries. He believes that its roadmap in climate mitigation and adaptation through preparation of national adaptation plan and nationally determined commitments is very clear, comprehensive and straightforward. However, Nepal is facing huge financial and technological constraints to fully implement these plans. Nepal is lacking of resources, technologies, inadequate infrastructure or challenging in enforcing regulations and plans. The gap between policy intentions and on the ground implementation can result in a disconnect between claimed efforts and actual results. It will have implications to meet ambitious climate targets without adequate support or investment from international communities. So, LDCs like Nepal, in Gautam's word, have to organize and claim for adequate international supports for more predictable, adequate and equitable resources and technologies for LDCs to achieve their climate ambitions. Dr. Thakur Silwal, Associate Professor of the Wildlife and Protected Area Management at Institute of Forestry, Pokhara, says forestry sector strategy aims to keep Nepal's forest cover at 45% with maximizing carbon sequestration target. However, our leadership is constantly arguing that forest ministry is obstacles to development pathways. The recent statement by the Prime Minister on revising forest regulation, a recent proposed strategy by MOFE on developing infrastructure development within the protected area, Nijgarh Airport decision on cutting trees despite Supreme Court order are some of the examples clearly show discrepancies on our commitment and reality, according to Dr. Silwal. He reminds that Nepal aims carbon neutral country by 2045. Nepal's carbon neutral strategy submitted to UNFCCC in Glasgow by the Prime Minister himself. The main strategy to remain carbon neutral, according to Dr. Silwal, is through carbon sequestration, which means increase in forest cover. Much emission we do have, the reason mitigation is not our primary focus. Despite such international commitment, we remain reluctant to focus on conservation of our forest resources. Dr. Silwal questions whether the recent decision to give landless household access to almost 1,000 hectares of forest land is yet another proof of how serious we are. Development versus destruction. Certain projects like planned road construction, hydroelectric power projects and cable car systems are being planned inside national parks under the pretext of development, and it is believed that these projects may harm the habitat of endangered species. It is a common argument that development is putting us on the path to destruction. Mr. Bogati supports deliberate growth through politics has a big influence on our development. This has left locals unhappy and resulted in awkward meandering highways. Nevertheless, problems can always be solved. Senior conservation officer who requests anonymity discloses that projects are largely taking too long period to complete the construction. So, there is always disturbing the wildlife and habitat. Scale of damages according to him is never ending, and laborers are the one who gradually start to settle down along or near the project sites such as road, hydropower, canals and so on. Simultaneously, illegal harvesting of forest products, smuggling, poaching and illegal trade of forest and wildlife products are also triggered for their subsistence. The senior conservation officer told this analyst that many of the projects are awarded to a select group of powerful individuals without following the proper legal channels. Some of these projects may result in the destruction of sensitive and forested areas for the profit of those individuals. Thus, the quality of governance declined to the point where neither the local communities nor the government could profit directly from it. As far as cable car is concerned, only short distances can be covered for recreational purposes. They cannot be used for transportation in areas where road networks have already been established. Furthermore, taking a cable car cannot replace hiking. According to development practitioner Tara Panthi, we should use national parks, rivers and other natural resources responsibly so that we can profit from them in a sustainable manner. Using sustainably suggests that we are also concerned with their preservation. In his opinion, technology has advanced to the point where it can assist us in making the most of natural resources without causing harm to them. Dr. Poudel asserts that building big infrastructure can provide value to society, but it is crucial to consider long-term impacts, risks and trade-offs. For example, haphazard road construction in Nepal costs billions and causes soil loss, landslides and casualties. Climate change impacts daily livelihoods, leading to flooding and landslide. Mandatory environmental impact assessment (EIA) and a code of conduct should be implemented for large infrastructure projects, ensuring natural ground and landscape. One of the experts of natural resource management and biodiversity conservation talked to this analyst that there is a contradiction in our intentions and policies regarding this. While we recently announced plan to create highways, hydroelectric power plants and other recreational facilities, these plans run counter to our own values. On the one hand, we are dedicated to conservation and required to uphold the global environmental agreements. He reveals that the entrenched mafias who are determined to take advantage of the untapped riches are making a clear move with this. With regard to development projects, we may take a very deliberate and prudent approach without causing significant environmental harm. Mr. Gautam claims that the fragmentation of habitats, deaths from vehicle collision when crossing highways, deaths from currents and easy access for poachers for illegal hunting and felling of rare plants and animals from protected areas are all factors. Genetic degradation will result from habitat fragmentation. For instance, numerous tigers have lost their lives in traffic accidents in Bardea and Chittor National Park as a result of colliding with cars while crossing the street. The irrigation canals that cross the Banke National Park have many wild creatures stuck in them. Maintaining biodiverse places with global significance for biodiversity will raise Nepal's status internationally and draw more visitors who would boost the country's economy and prosperity. Mr. Shrestha candidly states that Nepal intends to construct a pipeline system to transport petroleum products from India to Nepal, even as global efforts to reduce the use of fossil fuels are underway. This runs counters to Nepal's ongoing work on its long-term strategy for net zero emissions and its active participation in international climate initiatives such as the Paris Agreement. Notwithstanding these obstacles, it is critical to keep raising public awareness and educating the public, community members, young people and students about environmental conservation techniques and climate change. The main purpose of national parks in Dr. Silwal's words are in situ conservation and genetic resource pools. In situ conservation refers to the method of preserving an endangered plant or animal species in its native environment. Massive infrastructure undertakings such as hydroelectric plants should be discouraged, but infrastructure that is small scale and beneficial to animals should be permitted. For instance, fundamental tourist infrastructure. However, it might be necessary for us to devise a regularized solution. For instance, Rara, the most promising tourist destination, lacks a fully functional infrastructure according to Dr. Silwal. He reminds that the residents of two villages, Chhapro and Rara Gaon, were moved to Kohalpur Chisapani from Rara around 50 years ago in order to protect the lake. Unfortunately, there are more hotels reportedly in the works there, which is unfair to the local villagers who left their villages long ago. Impact of global warming on Nepal. In recent years, reports of increased occurrences of flash floods, drought, landslides and soil erosion have been made nationwide. These natural disasters have a greater impact on Nepal's lives and livelihood. Estimates indicate that the consequences of climate change such as reduced agricultural output, food poverty, strained water supplies, loss of forest and biodiversity and damaged infrastructure could endanger millions of people in Nepal. In a book chapter entitled Climate Resilient Forest Management, Chital et al. 2021 revealed that 6.61 million hectares of forest land make up Nepal, which accounts for 44.74% of the country's total area and 0.17% of the world's total forest area, since over 35% of Nepal's population depends on forest resources for a living. FAO 2018 claimed that deforestation and forest degradation are significant environmental problems for the country. Research studies claim that degradations occurs when forests continue to exist but lose their ability to generate all ecosystem services. Deforestation is a change of forest into another type of land cover. Important flora and fauna under threat. Experts believe that important tree species such as Dalbergia latifolia satisal and Pterocarpus marsupium bijesal are under threat from deforestation and forest degradation in the Tarai region. There is less wildlife in protected areas due to habitat loss and the division of large national forests into little regions. Ornithologists believe that 39 species recorded in Nepal have identified as globally threatened bird. Suklafata and Kositapu Wildlife Reserve, Chitwan National Park and Buffer Zone have been identified as key site of international significance for birds and biodiversity conservation. Way forward. Experts believe that many of climate change's concerns and difficulties might be resolved by successfully implementing National Adaptation Program of Action (NAPA). It should prioritize planned development operations above alignments that cut through the center of wetlands and forests, including rivers and streams that naturally occur. Utilize as much of the bare and open ground as possible around or next to human habitation, as well as regions outside of natural sites and wildlife habitats. Because of year-round improper management, wetlands are completely polluted and remain muddy, which has a direct influence on the aquatic habitat. Some experts assert that although forests exist, they must be managed scientifically to meet human demand for wood and timber. However, water management, which includes dry land and water source management, is essential and is often neglected. Similarly, researchers and professors suggest that Nepal must take immediate action on climate change adaptation due to unusual calamities. Implementing programs and activities to promote clean energy, conserve water, soil and forest, and adopt climate smart agriculture and forestry practices can help minimize greenhouse gas emissions and maximize carbon storage. This will help Nepal transition from fossil fuel to dependent livelihood to renewable energy based ones, contributing to a prosperous and sustainable future. They assert that mitigation is not the primary focus of Nepal's climate change policy, though it is believed that about 22% emission is from land use sector such as agriculture, forestry. Technological innovation can minimize methane emissions from rich cultivation, while vehicle based emissions can be reduced by switching to electric vehicles and promoting mass transit based public transport. Waste to energy innovation can be explored for waste management. Key areas include a nexus based approach, climate smart agriculture practice, and forest based enterprise for carbon sinking. Nepal should maintain its current mitigation measures and focus on adaptation, safeguarding existing policies. It should lead in bringing India and China to address global climate change, for forging joint partnerships and promoting mountain agendas in climate negotiations. After consulting various experts, it is essential to keep in mind that a crucial first step in achieving Nepal's goal of climate change adaptation and mitigation is the complete implementation of the 2030 nationally determined contribution (NDC) roadmap. Another essential component is its regular review to make sure that the objectives are being met. It is also crucial for the Nepali government to effectively mobilize the nation's financial and human resources and to advocate for further funding through international climate financing structures. In a nutshell, Nepal has the potential to significantly reduce its reliance on fossil fuels by investing in renewable energy sources such as hydropower, solar and wind power, and promoting renewable energy. Energy efficiency can be achieved by replacing traditional incandescent bulbs with LDCs, improving appliance standards and encouraging green buildings. Forests and land use can be improved through agroforestry practices and sustainable land management. Transportation can be minimized by constructing under or overpasses for wildlife and promoting non-motorized transport. Green finance can be used to mobilize public and private investments in renewable energy and climate resilient homes. Governments, individuals, communities and companies all have a vital role to play in the fight against climate change. Are we prepared to lead by example? If we take the necessary corrective action and proceed appropriately, time will tell. With this, let me conclude this episode. I will come up with a new episode in my next program. Thank you very much for watching me. Thank you once again.